checking. You should be good.
Okay, so folks, I will call us to order. So thank you for taking time out of your busy schedule to join us again for Teachers College. And I've heard several people commenting about the cool weather, so it is kind of nice that it's cooled off just a little bit. Seems like we had a very long and hot summer, but now we finally got a touch of cool air, so it kind of feels a little bit nice. At least I enjoy the cooler weather. We're going to have some interesting speakers today. They're going to share some. Well, I hope you're interesting. We have a couple of speakers that I hope are interesting today. They're going to share with us about active learning. But before we jump into their topics for today, I do want to draw your attention to a couple of changes on the syllabus, and the updated version has been posted in Sakai, and so you can get that there. But our sessions for October 16th and October 23rd are going to be flipped. And so what was going to happen on the 16th will now happen on the 23rd. What was going to happen on the 23rd is now going to happen on the 16th. And so please make note of that. Then the panel that is going to be on October the 30th, Dean Balzer's schedule has changed, and she's going to be gone on that day. And so Seth Heiner, who is one of our doctoral students in ag education, is going to facilitate that panel. And so that'll be an interesting day. For those of you that have submitted your teaching philosophy statements, Natalie should have sent you some others to critique and provide some feedback. And so we would ask that you get that feedback provided in a timely manner so that we can get that back to the rightful people. If you have not submitted your teaching philosophy statement yet, it's not too late. You still have time to be able to get that submitted, and we will get you some feedback on that. So before we begin with our new stuff today, our new content today, I want to think back to last week. And so last week, we talked about assessing student learning, and we talked about providing real-world experiences for your students. And so what I would like for you to do is to find a partner in your close area and reflect a little bit on what were some of the things that we talked about. And I know there were a couple people that weren't here, and so if you weren't here, then hopefully the other person can help shed a little bit of light. So let's take about a minute, and you guys can share with each other what you recall from our session last time. And folks online, you guys can use the type function to share some of the things that you recall from last week. We're sharing about what we did last week. So you can join, if you want to join the lady in front, that's fine. Okay, so let's come back together, and what I want to do is actually a good segue into our topic of today, which is active learning. And you guys were just experiencing one version of active learning, and so I'm going to pass the floor over to Kirby Barrett, and then Lane Turner will be joining him in just a moment to share their expertise and experience related to active learning. So All yours.
Thank you.
So you just have to
Do you
tell me.
control this thing?
I do.
Next slide, please.
Yeah.
He's like, man,
This is great. Dr. Bolzer, I could probably be a good teacher if I had somebody
Yeah,
like
somebody
Dr.
could
Wysocki and Elizabeth and Dr. Roberts and Natalie set everything up, and so it's really great.
They
And now-
make us look good.
and now
The
I'm gonna-
verdict is still out.
Okay, there you go. Now I'm gonna tell you a story. This is way back when I was still at Ohio State, and our distance delivery was by microwave via satellite. And so we actually had 9 students enrolled in the class on our campus, so we had people to make eye contact when we were teaching, but there are 16 other sites around the country that was, they were getting this from beaming up and all of that. There are actually 2 stories. One of the nights that I was doing part of the lecture, the satellite went down. I don't know, it blew out a bulb. I don't know nothing about satellites. But I finished the teaching, and they taped the rest of it so they could show it the next week. And I say to myself, so why didn't we just videotape the whole thing? And that way, when I screw up, we could back the tape up, and I could do it right, and it would look a lot better. But the other part was on this notion that way back then, because there was so much difficult technology. This is before y'all were born. That there were 5 people in the classroom, helping run things. There were 3 people in the control booth running all of that. And that's when I said, if I had 8 assistants every time I teach, I think I could do well. Well, I've never had 8 assistants since. Well, what we want to follow up then is reflecting on last week. And the topic is active learning strategies. And we want to, Dr. Turner and I will attempt to give you content, but also demonstrate those. So Dr. Roberts gave you an assignment then with your little discussion. I would like to hear from you then what it was that you want to share in reflecting on last week's presentation. Am I supposed to stand in a certain place? Does it matter?
You're fine.
I'm okay. Can we see the back?
Yes.
Oh dear. I should have worn my hairpiece or something. Okay. Who wants to be first? Okay, we'll skip to who wants to be second then, since nobody wants to be first. What were you sharing with each other? Yes, ma'am. Add to that or share a little bit more based on how you said it? Share.
Last week's bombing on to their discussion.
We'll see how good
Fortunately, I had
your
excellent
teacher
group
is.
members, yes. We just talked about the different ways of evaluating through testing and how different ones are appropriate. A lot more about actually engaging in like classroom experiences.
Incognito. Share experiences that you have had that you have talked about in building on what Clayton and Mom have shared. The experience that most of you have had in your education so far is that there are lots of assessments rather than just one big one. And you were shaking your head. So,
It's just not what I one thing that I would like or in the lecture What is the TA for? Teacher. So, whatever that.
There was some other head nods agreement with the mission, the intent of the semester. One shot, you pass others.
Their structure was here in the U.S. Classes were about 4 weeks. Met generally about twice a week. In the class portion, I pretty much had an in-class assignment. Also, do in class, but then between classes, so it wasn't necessarily evaluated, because a lot of it was just kind of like what did it or not, as you prepare for discussion. And then at the end of the 4 weeks, there was a big exam. Kind of wrap up the examination overall, but because the classes were so different, time, pretty much had 4 weeks to concentrate on this. It was a little bit different than USI structure. 4 to 5 classes for 6 months. Here you would same amount of classes in the same time, but only quite a bit different than anything I've experienced.
I was going to ask, did you like that?
Yeah, I found it very helpful to be able to focus on one thing at one time until I was really able to.
Others of you have had that type of experience?
I'm from Barbados and our British, so like classes for like 4 hours, develop biology. And then our exams were all comprehensive. Exams were like essay question, oral, so just like the class was shorter and everything was different. The whole systems were good. In Barbados, long hours in class. The exams were pretty comprehensive.
Others of you grew up in a system that was the British system, or I would say the European system. Others of you had those experiences? Yes.
I'm from India.
Clearly British influence there.
As Carol, but the exams are like all at the same time. I take courses that semester, all the exams are like, and that really stressed me out. All the time exams, all in within a week. So here it's much better. Exams are spaced out.
Based on personal experience and what you talked about last week, what would your preferences be then once you're teaching, say, undergraduate students?
I had some teaching here. Not every class period, but maybe once a week there would be a really short quiz, kind of stuff you were supposed to learn last week. As a student, I didn't evaluate their learning. It forces them to basically do material, do it incrementally. So
not sure you could all hear that. Others have that type of
Evaluations. I know. Every other looks
here, or is that something?
Excuse me, Kirby. So the farther you move that way, the harder it is for them to hear.
Okay.
So we can try the wireless mark like at the break.
I'll quit wandering around so much then. I'll draw a little box.
And continue to repeat the questions.
Yes, I'll be on the batters. I understand. Oh, there's a story behind that too, but we don't have time for all my stories. One other person wants to add an experience or what your preference is based on your experience and what you talked about in class.
Capstone classes where like you're given a project, there's a kind of amount of it where so like for example, I'm a food scientist, so we had a classroom incorporate with them from first year on undergrad to the last year for undergrad, big project, and then the actual project was a competition for us to get to a national competition, so it was more like academic skill for school and for grade, but also if we were competitive enough, we can move on to like a national event where we can other schools. So that was kind of fun. It gives you like a more motivation to do something as opposed to just like a grade and then what else. So I don't know, but that experience is great.
Cheryl used the word fun. I mean, really? Fun? We're supposed to have fun while we're learning? And the answer, of course, is yes, that's okay. One of my favorite quotes, by the way, is when it's quiet in the classroom, maybe the confusion is in the minds of the children. So it's okay to have discourse and to have a little bit of fun and smile at us. Well, good. I think that's a good wrap up. What I wanted to share with you as a result of that is the whole notion of discussion. Discussion is actually not well used in our classrooms. There is a difference between question and answer and discussion. I can have on my teaching agenda a list of questions that I can ask, and I'll ask a question and get an so that you could have actually said, no, I think this one big exam at the very end is the way to go, and here's why. Now, no one in the room either believes that, or at least they were brave enough to share that. We did get an instance of the British system, which is much more that way. India, I've done some work in Egypt, which even though the British weren't there very long, the British system is fairly prevalent in Northern Africa, those areas. So the discussion is getting the students to go one way or another and across that. Now, we're supposed to have where do I get a marker? I understand I can write on the wall here.
You can.
Okay. Oh, you even have an erase.
The front and back wall.
Yes. we do not write on the walls. And I don't need much space, so we don't need to get rid of it. Just wanted to diagrammatically show you what we're talking about. Yes, we were taught as children, don't mark on the wall, especially with markers. So when we have question and answer, we're really the teacher, student, teacher, student, teacher, student. When we're in discussion, then we have one piece of information that comes out like that, but then we have these other I think I got everybody. Every once in a while, these are students. This then is the discussion where there's give and take. That works in my experience. That works probably more with graduate students, upper level undergraduate students. Freshmen aren't into this. It's by statement because they've been taught to come in, sit down, be quiet, and listen to what I'm saying, rather than sharing across there. But it still can be very workable. So this is discussion. These things don't work real well on here, do they? And this is question and answer. But the point is, discussion is an active learning strategy. Discussion is an active learning strategy. And the handout that Dr. Turner and I have for you has a little bit more discussion about discussion as an active learning strategy. So that's where we wanted to start with this evening. In reflecting on last week, using class discussion, have you share together, and interact to add to complement, to refute what others have said. That's all part of the active learning strategy of discussion. Dr. Turner, I think you're up. Get rid of him.
Well, that was fun because it made me think about the year that I spent as an exchange student in New Zealand, which certainly has a more British system. And I took a full academic year there. Some of my classes went half the year. Some of my classes went the full year. But we had end of course major exams that were anywhere from 50% to 100% of my grade in the one exam, which was totally different for me and a different way to study and prepare. Plus the fact that they were all concentrated in a 2-week period at the end of the term, and then all the grades were published in the newspaper. Now, this was some years ago, okay? I don't know if they still publish all the grades in the newspaper. Certainly we wouldn't be able to do that here, but it was really, really different. I still have the newspaper, by the way, from those final grades. I have it tucked in a photo album somewhere so that I don't forget what that was like. So, our objectives today, now we're getting to our objectives. I always have to have those in hand, but we wanted to do this reflective exercise first. So our objectives first are to define active learning. So for you to leave today with a couple of strategies that you could incorporate. How many of you are teaching currently? Anybody teaching currently? Okay, a couple. Okay, so that's something that you could incorporate now. For the rest of you, ideas that you could incorporate in the future. And then talk a little bit about some of the real or perceived barriers to using more active learning strategies in the classroom. So those are some of the things that we want to touch on. Again, as Kirby said, along the way, modeling some different active learning strategies. So everybody looks like they have pen and paper, keyboard, something that they can construct some thoughts on. So I want you to take a minute. On the next slide, I have a question. So how would you define active learning? I'm going to give you a minute to get your thoughts on paper. So respond to that. Can't time a minute. Probably giving you a little more than a minute, but I don't have a second hand. I have an old-fashioned kind of watch that just has 2 hands and no numbers. Used to drive my children crazy. They only know digital clocks. They don't know how to tell time, and they'd say, "What time is it?" And I'd show them my watch. "Mom!" And they go run and find a digital clock. So, Melissa, how would you define active learning?
For me, like
idea about the doc, they can do some research, and we have a discussion about that during your class. Like, you should do some more integrating your class, participating, sharing ideas, giving ideas of their own ideas.
Okay, so giving students an opportunity to interact with the ideas, maybe setting that up beforehand or giving them that opportunity to. Okay, okay. These are the folks.
Yep. They can talk. Too.
Huh?
There we go.
Can we hear them?
Yes, if they want.
Okay. Reza, how would you define active learning?
From my point of view, just engaging the students in a discussion in the class, or in the science, it's easy to do active learning in the lab setting.
Okay, so engaging in discussion, certainly in a lab setting where you are hands-on, doing something would be active learning. Let's see. So, how would you define active learning?
I think it's any sort of activity that the student does in class or outside of class that is related to the class, and instead of just asking.
Okay, so we can contrast between active and passive. So passive, we tend to think of as people just sitting and receiving rather than doing something with that, or actually being active, doing. So doing is a key word. So I'm going to use the definition that's on the handout, which is posted in Sakai, so you have access to that. So on the next slide.
So you have a couple.
What? Oh.
So actually doing something in discussion, writing, lab, sharing-based inquiry.
Okay.
Students themselves find answers and solve problems.
Great, great, excellent. Here we go. So here's a definition that's on your handout. Instructional activities involving students doing things and thinking about what they're doing. So it's more than just doing something. There needs to be some cognitive wheels turning in the process as well. Why? Well, you've already learned about that. Next slide. If you remember this diagram. You can tell me what this diagram, or can explain this diagram for me. No, Grady, you're not allowed. Grady's not allowed. Hangway? Can you explain what's going on in this diagram or what this represents?
It's kind of like how people learn. So they may just based on their experience. At the beginning, they will based on their experience, and maybe they will catch things faster. But down the line, if you don't have interaction or you don't think through it, then the learning speed, learning effective is. So the time the instructor inspire or stimulate the student, then the student will provide their reflection to the content, then they may catch more things in the content.
Okay, and that was very good. I caught you off guard, didn't I? But hopefully the rest of you were thinking about how you would describe it if I had hold on you. So a key part to me for this process, particularly when you're using strategies where students are doing things, they need time to reflect and generalize. How does this fit with what I already know? How does that fit with what I learned last week? Where are we going? How is this in a broader context, so that there's an opportunity for that thinking, doing, definitely want something that students are doing, but then add on there, make sure that they think about that. Other thing that you have also discussed is some of the principles of effective teaching. Remember this list? Chickering and Gamson, probably a few weeks ago now, but some of the principles of good teaching really set the stage for active learning strategies. We want frequent contact, interaction between the learners, not just that one-way communication from teacher to student, engagement, feedback. Again, using active learning strategies where students are doing, thinking, reflecting, you automatically create a feedback mechanism. Spending time on task, and rather than being passive receivers, physically doing or actively doing things, expectations and recognizing diversity. But again, this sort of sets the stage for an active learning focus. So we're going to take something that you've already talked about, again, get you to reflect a little bit. You've learned about writing objectives, right? Or about writing objectives. So, next slide. I want you to write an objective, and with the 3 parts, performance, conditions, criterion, either from a course that you're teaching now, a course that you've taught in the past, or just make up an objective. So take a few minutes and write an objective, but I'm particularly interested in the performance. What is it that you want the students to do? Okay? So take a few minutes and write an objective. Okay, Urka's got a response up here. Urka, can you share your objective with us? I can read it, but why don't you tell us your objective?
Oh, I want students to be able to recommend an appropriate mosquito control strategy based on habitat assessment.
Okay, so Urka's is that students will be able to recommend an appropriate mosquito control strategy based on habitat assessment. So what you want the students to do is recommend.
Right.
Correct? Okay, good. Another example in the room. It's got an objective they want to share. Yasa?
How does antibiotics affect bacterial growth? That's the objective. So I want the students to prepare 2 pounds of plates, 1 with antibiotics and
So your verb in that objective would be describe how antibiotics affect bacterial growth, perhaps? So you want them to tell you after they've done a little experiment. Okay, one more, another objective.
students will be able to
Okay, so they're going to formulate critical comments about papers that they've read. So they're going to write something for you. Okay, so we're going to recommend, we're going to describe, we're going to write. AJ has be able to quantify ground cover in longleaf pine ecosystems and derive indices of biodiversity. So we're going, AJ, you want students to calculate or quantify something, come up with a numerical representation, correct? Okay, so for which of those objectives will students be better able to perform if they listen to you talk? Any of those? Listening to you would be the best method for helping them to achieve that objective? Not likely. How much of the time in classrooms do we listen to people talk? Listening to me talk right now, but we've infused some other things in there. So if we go to the next slide, we kind of think about helping students to achieve that objective, what will work the best. Again, listening to us talk sometimes is the most effective. Maybe they need to read something, discuss with others, explain to others, solve a problem, interview an expert, debate, design a project or process, complete a project. So we had an experiment, we have papers we're reading, we're going to do a habitat assessment and use that to make a recommendation. We're going to quantify, we're going to measure some things. So as we look at your performance objectives for your class, think about what's the best way to help students achieve those. And then think about, how can I do that in my classroom? What can I do differently to give students the opportunity to be more actively engaged? Okay. So this is kind of where this all is about. Because we know, if we go to the next slide, that learners learn best through their activity. Not my activity, but their activity. Now sometimes that activity looks passive because they're sitting, but you can tell if there are active things going on here. And active doesn't always have to be a physical motion. If you have engaged the thought process, you have gotten students to think about what's being discussed or what's being lectured about, then it's active. The student is doing something. So we know that learners learn best when they are active, when they have motivation, direction, and knowledge of process. This is where it's really important, particularly for students who have been schooled in a more passive way, that if we are going to do things differently in the classroom, we want to make sure that students know why we're doing this. Why are we doing this exercise? Why am I having you interact in groups? Why have we flipped the classroom so that lectures are online and in class is homework? Why have we done this? When students understand why, they certainly tend to be more motivated to do. They understand or can see where you're going with something and understand how. One of the things we know about getting students to think more critically, which is often one of our teaching goals, is that students don't naturally know how to think critically in the subject that you're teaching. We have to model that. We have to show them our thought process. We have to put up a problem if the course is more quantitatively oriented. Put up a problem, let the students think about how they might solve that. As you solve it in a demonstration, maybe it's the first one they've ever seen of this type, talk about what you're thinking. Talk about how you got from step 1 to 2 rather than just going through the steps. That helps students understand the process. So there's a lot of levels to this in trying to get students to learn how to think in the discipline, learn how to think like an expert, learn how to behave like a professional, whatever that case may be. So, next slide. Summary in part. So learners need to do more than just listen. They need to read, write, discuss, solve problems, be engaged in higher order thinking tasks. And you talked about different higher order thinking tasks and what that means in terms of writing objectives, in terms of instruction. And then finally, one more summary here. So we want to promote independent learning, that the learner is taking responsibility for the learning, that process process is really important. It's not just about the outcome, but do they understand the steps? Do they understand the mechanism? Do they understand how to derive the formula, whatever it might be? And then the teacher becomes more of that coach, facilitator, rather than the transmitter, the one-way transmitter. So when we teach in an active learning mode, we are doing more facilitating than one-way communication. All right, so let's pause here for a second. Just in the last 45 minutes, how many different active learning strategies have you experienced? Discussion. Question and answer. Writing. Is that what you're going to say? We did a couple of different kinds of writing exercises. This is just one list on the next slide of some different types of active learning strategies. There's a few more in your handout. So Kirby demonstrated discussion, so that's certainly one, and also explained the difference between discussion and questioning or question and answer. Okay. The first writing exercise I had you do is what we call a minute paper. So you give students a minute to write down a response to a question. It's a very short writing, so it doesn't take a lot of time in the classroom, but it allows students to think whether you want them to reflect on the past or put out an idea for the future, and then you can use that in a discussion, in a questioning strategy. Again, questioning and participatory lecture kind of bleed over a little bit so that you're having students participate in that process rather than just being passive. So there's a lot of other examples, and we're going to go on with a demonstration of another active learning strategy.
Okay. My understanding that you have prepared at least the first draft of your own teaching philosophy. Is that the correct assumption? You have submitted that and you have feedback on that. Is that also a correct assumption? You don't have the feedback. You don't have the feedback yet. Well, that's good. That way, what we're going to demonstrate will be on your thinking and not on reactions from other people. And that's okay for where I am. But is that a better side for me to write on, or is that a better side?
Did you try the black marker?
Okay. I'll write over here. Just from where I sit, there's a
Well,
glare
actually,
over here.
you could do it.
Whichever works better.
Do it here, and I'll turn the camera so they can see it.
Okay. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what you are going to do. Here's what you're going to do on the whole notion of concept mapping. We're going to now prepare a concept map. Quickly do some work there, then we'll put some up here on the board, and then we'll talk about what that exercise was. And the concept map that we're going to talk about is teaching philosophy. So here's one way to use a concept map, and that is in the middle of a paper. Our topic is teaching philosophy. What I would like for you to do to expand this concept map is indicate the factors that influence that teaching philosophy, the parts that go together to make your teaching philosophy diagrammatically. So you'll have a factor that influences your teaching philosophy and another factor. There's no magic number of circles that go around that big circle, and some of them may have some additional inputs that influence this input, which influence your teaching philosophy. So take 2 or 3 minutes. Doesn't have to be beautiful. Your circles don't have to be lovely. You can use squares if you want to. That's not a hang-up. But on what you think and know about a teaching philosophy, what are the factors that's a bad place to sit, isn't it?
Sure, I know.
Yeah. What are the factors? What are all the thoughts that came together that influence what you prepared as your teaching philosophy? For our distant folks, if you just sort of jot down those concepts, and we will add them to what we put up here on the whiteboard, which is camouflaged to look like a wall. It's hard place, isn't it? Okay. I wonder where you get that kind of paint. I could paint my office like this.
You can get it from the paint store. It's expensive.
Oh, I'll write a grant to the dean.
For your grandchildren.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
McCarty would look better as the 34th Street.
I noticed that most of you have several bubbles written. It's also kind of interesting to watch how you're constructing yours, and that's fine because we all have different philosophies. So therefore, our pictorial representation or philosophy might be different as well. Let's just just share some ideas. What might be in one of those bubbles, an influence or a factor associated with your teaching philosophy?
Experience.
Experience. Do you have anything that added to that experience?
I mean, maybe it's gonna be related to your goals for
Okay. Experience, maybe teaching goals have an influence on the experience, or it has an influance on how you wrote your teaching philosophy. Other words that we can put in a bubble that would influence our teaching philosophy. Just as examples, we're not going to come up with a perfect diagram today.
Online you had, I would say empowering, power.
empowering our students. Students' interest. If I may alter that a bit, we could just have student there, and one of them is their interest. Believe it or not, some of the courses that we require in an undergraduate major, the student interest is not very high. I know, I just said that out loud. You can probably name them. I can still. It's been a long time since my undergrad degree. Fortunately, in graduate education, we're interested in all of those courses that we're required to take. What else about a student, in addition to the student's interest, might influence our teaching philosophy?
How you want to learn.
Is that a characteristic of the students?
Based on their
So their experience, for example, I think from my narrow background, experience, that is having a good comprehension of chemistry, really helps in a soil science course later on, likewise in physics. So that experience, if I didn't have that experience, my experience of having grown up on a farm helped me a lot as a student in especially in the agriculture stuff. My interest in being a teacher, because that's what I wanted to do. That was my career goal for my baccalaureate degree, and has been ever since. What else about students? Student ability? We wring our hands about that all the time. Now, in a place like Florida, you know, we're so selective admissions, and they're all really good students, right? Well, they are, but there's still differences even within this really, however many reallys I said, good students, that some are still at the bottom of the pile of the really good students. So there are differences then in their ability. So that also influences how we teach. So that's another one. Well, let's move away from students. Other factors or influencers on your personally held teaching philosophy. One more, and then we'll move on. Qualities. That's our own abilities. Some of us are more into teaching than others. We have different qualities. Some of you are better speakers than I am, so that's purely a quality. The whole notion of planning, because I think teaching takes a lot of planning. Some of you are better planners, and on all those sorts of ideas. Well, the point is that all of this comes together then, and you have many more, I understand that, to come together for our teaching philosophy. So that's a way for us to diagram this concept of teaching philosophy. Now here's the big question. Where would we use this? If we were teaching, teacher's college course, and we were teaching about teaching philosophy, how might we use a concept map in that group, which looks an awful lot like y'all? We wouldn't use it? You can't see a way to use it? How can we use this?
By looking at each individual person's different philosophies, ways we can incorporate something from someone else's perspective into our own.
Excellent. And if I may paraphrase that, we can teach the concept of teaching philosophy with a concept map. Now, we could have started with this discussion before you ever had that assignment, so this would have been a way. Now, the downside of that might be, when I, as your teacher, put all of these bubbles up here, and then you write your teaching philosophy, you would tend to include all of those in yours because you think it's the right answer, and that's not what this is about at all. So the downside would be that you all would think, well, I have to talk about experience, I have to talk about it. No, that's not the way it is. But we could teach the concept of teaching philosophy by using the concept map. How else can we use a concept map?
influence our own teaching.
To influence our own teaching so that we have, if I understand you correctly, so we have a good concept, no pun intended, of where we're going with all of this. It's an overview, it's a map, hence the word, of how all of this comes together, no matter what the subject is. It could be soil science. I already talked about soil science. It could be soil science, what concept there, how all of this fits together. Other ways you can think of. Well, yes, sir.
To see or to show the whole picture.
To show the whole picture, right. And at what point in our teaching could we show the whole picture? We can show it at the beginning as an introduction. Here's where we're going. We can also use it as a summary. We have now talked about whatever the concept is for 3 class periods. It's now Friday, it's a Monday, Wednesday, Friday class. It's the Friday class. I am finished helping you with all of that content so we can use this concept map to say, this is what we just have done. This is what we have studied. Hopefully this is what you have learned. So it can be a wrap-up. Or on Monday morning, I can come in and, because especially for undergrads, it is a long time from Friday at 10 until Monday at 9. Anybody have any clue what we talked about last week? Well, we can use a concept map then as a review. This is where we are. We're now going to move on. And as Yahoo's, is that correct? Right. As Yahoo indicated, I can also show this so that today we're talking about this bubble. And then tomorrow we talk about this bubble so that the students can see how all this stuff goes together. How all this goes together. We could concept map the entire undergraduate curriculum. And maybe we should do that so the students see that there is a bubble called general education. That's a part of a baccalaureate degree. And what are the parts of that? And perhaps they can begin to appreciate what it is that we put together for 120 semester hours, that if they complete that successfully, we bless them and say, you're an educated person. Go out and do good things. So lots of different ways that we can use this concept map. Let me quickly draw another one, just for the heck of it. Only as an illustration that it doesn't have to be bubbles. This is also a concept map. It's an organizational chart. And this one happens to be a senior vice president for agriculture and natural resources, a dean for the college, a dean for research, a dean for extension, and then these departments that report, and then there's maybe dotted lines there. Dr. Bolzer, I can't remember what it looks like. You can look it up actually on the IFAS web. But that also is a concept map. It's an organizational chart. So folks can see the concept of the administrative organization of the Institute of Food and Agricultural Sciences. And of course, we could also go one higher, although I'm too short to do this now. We have this dude called a president, and we also have this bunch of dudes and dudesette called the Board of Trustees. So then we see all of the University of Florida. And somewhere in here, way down here, we have these 50,000 circles. They're called students. Yeah, so they're a part of that as well. So just a different diagram that we can use. Let's see, we have some horticultural science folks. Yes, horticultural science. Plant pathology would work as well. The key to plant identification is a concept map. It's either a monocotyledon or it's a dicotyledon. So we start out with plants. We have 2 blocks, monocots and dicots, and every plant then is below that. And we can talk about leaves and serration and yada, 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 on. That also is a concept map. So being all the way down to genus and species, that's a concept map as well. So what's a concept map? It helps us illustrate a concept. We can use it as an introduction to a new unit or new topic. We can use it as we're teaching, follow it along. and we can use it as a wrap-up or a summary of what we've done, a review, and then where we might take off from there into a bigger concept. What questions, thoughts, reactions do we have on this active learning strategy called concept maps? Flow diagrams can also be concept maps, absolutely. Venn diagrams also would be a concept map, how these different parts of a whole come together in some reasonable fashion. Good point.
I think like learn from I think it is integrated learning, like in diagrams and math, it helps you to kind of integrate the subject into what you're learning.
Precisely. Yeah, bingo. Excellent. Excellent. Thank you. Okay.
The concept map is all for your so subject ask your teacher or individual subject.
Okay, the question is it for the whole class or the course or the class period or a subject? The answer is yes. Okay? Now, wouldn't it be interesting, I've never done this, probably never will, wouldn't it be interesting the first day of class, instead of giving them that syllabus, which we're required to have, and I agree with that we would have a concept map of the course. And the course is in soil microbiology. Yes, I knew I would get an amen from the front row. Well, what are all the parts then? We have for an undergrad course typically 3 hours courses, 15 class sessions. We don't have 15 concepts. Maybe there are make up a number 6. And each of those, by the way, might be one of the major objectives for the course. So for the course, we would have 6 bubbles around the center, which says soil microbiology. And that helps them see where we're going for the entire course. But then we can do it for today's particular topic, active learning strategies. And we could have started with active learning, erase the circles, with the active learning in the center, and then what are all the parts that come into active learning, and what are the parts that go into concept maps and discussion and effective lecturing and all those sorts of things. So it can be used anywhere. It helps us show the big picture, for lack of a better term. Either before, when we're starting to teach, while we're presenting, teaching the content, and also a way to wrap up in something. We need to move along, I think. Dr. Turner?
I'll give you another example of how you could use a concept map, particularly if you have concepts that have very, you have an idea like plant taxonomy or something that has very specific components. You could use a partially completed concept map as an assessment and have students fill in the other bubbles for various parts of the concept map. But you can't just throw that out as an assessment with no context. They would have to have become familiar with concept mapping through classroom experiences, so that wouldn't be something you'd want to go into cold. But if you had helped them use that strategy, and for visual learners, it's very much more helpful to have a concept and the parts illustrated in a diagram than in a linear set of notes, right? Because the way they take notes is very linear, just write down the page. You can help them organize that into a visual representation. For a lot of people, that helps make the concepts even make much more sense. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about implementing active learning strategies. And to do that, I want you to take a minute and think about what barriers you might feel if you were teaching a class. What might make it harder for you to implement one or more of these active learning strategies? What are some potential barriers to having a more active learning focused classroom? So take a minute and think about that. You might want to jot a note or two. So if you would now turn to your neighbor. If you would turn to your neighbor and share your thoughts about perceived barriers, so share that back and forth. Share amongst yourselves. Can they type? Can they see each other's type?
Yeah. They could even talk.
They don't do that? Okay. So can you type in there, distance folks, type amongst yourselves?
Sure.
He types. Okay, it looks like you have lots of ideas about barriers. I'm not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but let's hear a couple of thoughts. So, whose pair wants to share? Clayton?
We had a really good discussion, but one thing we both kind of had a lot of agreement on was actually devising the active learning strategies to place a little bit higher toll on the teachers, both to be more organized and also, spend the time to really plan on these good activities. Certainly should be doing, but we have limited time.
Okay, so time to prepare on the part of the instructor might be a barrier. It may be easier to just grab the notes from last semester and walk in and spout. Okay? Another barrier, potential barrier.
Like currently I teach 2 classes, so like sometimes just the oral of the classroom, like one class is more like laid back, they're more like, the other class is more like jovial, that it's to be engaged and to participate, so I guess kind of like feeling the class and kind of catering to what their energy is one barrier.
So the personality of the class, and classes have a definite personality, but the personality of the class as a whole may make you wonder if what you're going to try will be successful. Okay. Let me see what we've got out here. Janessa added, students can be intimidated by the rest of the class. Rena had said discussions or activities may be dominated by a few students. Harder to engage undergraduate students in a discussion. Class control, did that come up in any of your discussions? Loss of control of the classroom. Oh my gosh, did that come up for anybody? That's a common one. Because again, as the instructor, we have this image of what everything should happen in our classroom. One more.
Well, just to go on what you were saying, I think is being
Okay.
it's a skill for sure. and I think
It is definitely a skill to facilitate discussion effectively. And that may be one of the qualities of the teacher that informs your teaching philosophy and the way you approach things. That may or may not be a strength of yours. It also is hard, and we know we have a lot to say and we're comfortable with the lecture method, to wait and to experience silence in your classroom. But silence in your classroom is a good thing. Thinking they're doing, even if it's not out loud. So most of these I had captured in advance on a slide, so summary. Preparation time, maybe risky, loss of control, sacrificing the content. As teachers, we tend to be obsessed with, I have to cover the content. Well, don't you really want to uncover the content for the students so that they can discover what it means to learn about this particular subject? Sometimes we get too tied into, I have to do all 16 chapters and every element in all 16 chapters. If we really want to promote active engagement in the classroom and strategies for lifelong learning, we may have to decide what are the key concepts, what are the key points that this student needs to take this material to the next class, the next level, whatever it is, and not cover every single thing. Preparation time, absolutely. It does take more time to think about activities and to put materials together. But once you've done it a few times, you have a toolkit of ideas that you can use and recycle, if you will, the same kinds of activities. Resources and methods, well, that's why you're in Teachers College. But most of us, as we were coming through PhD programs, postdoctoral training, whatever we did, didn't have this opportunity for resources to learn about how to do things like this. Loss of control, again, sometimes we have to get out of our personal comfort zone and everybody's quiet and sitting, and we're moving. The students are moving. If you noticed when Kirby was having you do something, he's walking around the classroom. So he's, again, connecting with you. I know I'm not supposed to go too far because of the microphone. I was trying not to get too far. But he's connecting with the student even while they're doing something, whether it's while he's talking, while he's quiet and you're doing something. But moving around, we don't have to stay in one place. Although I remember some student evaluations that I got some years ago, because I tend to not stand still. And I had at least one person that didn't like that at all, wanted me to stand still. But it's kind of hard. Sometimes we get, speaking of loss of control, we get unexpected results. Daniel was sharing a strategy that I've used quite effectively in a large class. That sometimes comes up. I think large classes came up from IRCA. But in a large class, I had 3x5 cards. That was part of their materials they were required to bring to class every day. And at the end of class, most of the time it was a lecture, but some active learning, think, pair, share, minute papers, other things thrown in there. At the end of class, I asked them to take that card, and it was always the same every day. On one side, they needed to write something that they had learned or was interesting to them that day. On the other side, something that they still had a question about, was unclear, that they wanted to know more about. I took those back in a 300-person class. It's about a 2-inch stack. But I could go through that in about 20 minutes and find out what were the things that weren't clear, what do I need to go back over, what's happening. It's a great feedback tool for the instructor. But sometimes you get information that you're not expecting. One of the first times that I taught this class, you've heard this story, one of the first times that I taught this class here on campus was in Norman Hall. If you know where Norman Hall is, on the other side of 13th Street, there's a big auditorium in there, and it's very long. The auditorium is very long, so it's a long way to the back of the room, further than this. And at that time, I was using presentation software called Astound, and back then we did everything with blue backgrounds and yellow letters, right, because that was the best contrast. But to see that well, you had to have the lights down, so I really couldn't see the back of the room. It was back there, but I couldn't see that very well. So one day I picked up my cards and I'm going through them and I get to a card that says, this couple that always sits by me is always kissing in the back of the room. They're always making out and it drives me nuts. And I think, well, why do you not sit there? So these people have come and sat by you. Maybe you need to sit somewhere else. But so I thought about, should I say anything? Should I not say anything? And I kind of let it pass over. And another time it came up, and probably the same person made the same comment about this couple making out in the back of the classroom. And I felt like because it was disruptive to at least one person, and maybe to more, it wasn't bothering me because I couldn't see anything. Maybe I should mention it. So at the beginning of the class, I told them, you know, how much information I was getting from their cards and how valuable it was to me as an instructor and how many things we were able to clear up in that way, but that sometimes I was getting information that, you know, I needed to address. And one of the things about being a good classroom member is that your behavior in class is not distracting to others. And so if you are talking to your neighbor or perhaps kissing your neighbor, that might be distracting to someone. And of course, everybody laughed, ha, 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 ha. And I got several cards that day. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. So it must have been a real problem in the back. I have no idea. And so I thought, great, problem solved, mission accomplished. And about 2 weeks later, I started getting, they're at it again. I don't know what you're going to do. Not exactly loss of control, but maybe unexpected information or things that happen in your classroom as a result of trying to do some things that are a little more creative. Anyway, had to throw that story in somewhere. So we have another example for you. And I'm excited about this one because I've never experienced it, so I'm going to watch and learn, called carousel brainstorming.
We could tell stories forever, couldn't we? I also talked, there were only about 100 in this one. These were doctoral students in the data analysis course. It was a tiered room up to the top. You know, I saw this same couple beside each other. They weren't kissing. Young man failed the course. Comes to me and wants to know what he could do or could have done to pass the course. You know, in a big class, sometimes the students think that you really don't know what's going on. I merely said, perhaps you could take the course again and not sit and talk to the woman beside you during the entire class period. Actually, he was taken aback that I knew that he was talking all the time to the woman beside him. I don't know whether they were a couple before the class or if I helped create that, whatever. But it's kind of interesting. You think you're getting away with stuff. But his mother always said, someone's going to find out. Carousel brainstorming. This is going to be fun. First of all, and Dr. Roberts and I and others of our colleagues have done quite a bit of teaching in Egypt, both for university faculty and also with high school agriculture teachers. We have learned that, first of all, the term carousel is not known in the Arabic language. And even to try to demonstrate what a merry-go-round is, that didn't go well at all. And then brainstorming also does not translate. There is no word in the Arabic language like brainstorming. They finally came up with a tornado in your head. Well, that's a little on the negative side. Okay, we're not talking about tornadoes here. And we all know what brainstorming is. Carousel brainstorming. You are going to be involved in this. I'm going to give you some instructions that'll make all of this happen. Fortunately, there's an even number of folks that is divided by 4. Thank you. I'm not sure how our colleagues, you're going to have to brainstorm all by yourself, so there won't be much of a carousel unless you all are very close to one another and can move around, but I don't think that's true. I think you're all over the place. So, this group of 4, and this group of 4, this group of 4, and this group of 4 different groups. We're trying to get to light. So this group is going to write over here, and this group is going to write over there. And the two groups here are going to go to the back wall. Also is a writable surface. Don't write on the sides. Okay, they are not. So this group on that side, that group on that side, when we're ready to go. Now here are your instructions. Here's what we want to talk about. Assessing student learning. You've already discussed this, haven't you? So when your group gets together, I'm going to use you as my guinea pigs. Okay? So this group of four are going to come up here. The first thing they're going to decide among themselves and share with us right away is what student learning assessment strategy do you want to talk about? It might be this weekly quizzes. So if they choose weekly quizzes, won't need to, they will write up here weekly quizzes. And then they are going to write for us a very quick description of what that is, and that's pretty obvious. Quizzes, you call it quiz. But then, more importantly, we'll list a couple positive aspects of that strategy to assess student learning, and one or two negative aspects of using that student learning assessment strategy. Let me give you a couple minutes. That's the brainstorming part. The carousel brainstorming part is we're going to act like a carousel, a merry-go-round. So when it's time to move, it's time to move. You don't have everything up here you wanted to, that's okay. You are going to move to that wall. And then you're going to add to, subtract from, embellish, whatever topic this group has put up here. And you're going to move to the back, and you're going to so that we will do all four. We'll move 4 times, so that you will end up, the 5th move will be back up here with yours. So as you move to the next group, you can add some content that you think need to be added. You can disagree with it by saying we disagree, or just put it, don't erase it. You can put a line through it that you didn't agree that was really a drawback of using that assessment technique. So we will have, when we're finished, 4 student learning assessment techniques that have some positive aspects of using that in your class and some not so positive or drawbacks of using that in class. What questions do you have about your assignment that you're going to be involved in about 10 seconds? Questions? Okay, well we have markers for each of you, so if you'll go ahead and move to your assigned area. Remember, the very first quick activity is what student learning assessment technique are you going to write up there? Write it up there so we all know what you're talking about. Everyone is enamored with it.
Anything that involves doing something.
Okay, so this is bonus questions. This group up here is using bonus questions, so you can't use bonus questions.
And they'll come
Back there we have final project, so we can't use that. You all have a topic yet? We need a topic. And let's see. 4 is doing seminar. Oh, and demonstration. Good. So we don't have any repetition. Go for it.
We can do maybe
Yeah, we haven't put it in.
I'll do it.
Up there, and I think I might.
Come to class.
Okay, another 30 seconds and then we're going to move.
Whatever.
All right, let's move to clockwise around the room. Move to the next group. Take your pen with you. Yes, take your pens with you. Go back in that corner. Yes, sir. We're moving. Other people can. You have a chance to come back.
So, ownership.
Nothing else, we have taught them to be thorough, huh? You
That's
gotta
right.
get the job done. It's not gonna Good, you're all taking a moment to read what's there, and then you can add, embellish.
Me, I feel like sometimes you're not doing your best in class, and it kind of acts as like sometimes when you like when you're not doing your best,
We're going to move in 30 seconds.
a different meaning of improvement, like
Yeah. So just trying to pass from
maybe different improvements, like well, it's really good, but it's like a second chance, you know, like a free or something. They're invested in me. And
Okay,
if I
finish
hadn't
the thought
done
that you
it
might be
earlier,
writing
I
now.
still
We're ready
having
to
these
move to the
opportunities
next
to
group.
myself. And it's like it gives you a motivation to come to class doing things. So if you see a trend, you see that you're like, well, I better go to class more often because I'm not doing the best. But
Okay,
I can
10.
Okay, we're ready to move. Absolutely.
So one comment I see is it doesn't necessarily test long-term retention. It's more testing listening skills, not learning.
Yeah, some students need that.
Retention or learning.
Some students need it.
30 seconds, and then we'll move one more time. Well, actually, not one more. 30 seconds.
One pro is it give an opportunity to teacher, after you do the bonus question, then you can work through the problem in class. Oh,
But if the teacher can immediately see it.
yeah, that's true. That have to be turned in right away.
But you could do that with this thing, like with the.
Yeah, it depends kind of on the classroom with all that new technology stuff.
Okay, let's move to your fourth group.
It's okay.
Because the performance is just very good.
Judith.
So,
Okay, any last minute thoughts or additions, and then you're ready to go back to your original wall. Okay, let's move back to your original drawing. That has been embellished. At least more colors. I don't know whether it's good stuff, but it's more colors. Take a moment to see what others have done to your original work. You could, yes. If you wanted to jot something down quickly, you may. Scratch out something from the book.
Just to give the picture that you're talking about. If you show you're like, then you're like, hey, this is the famous stuff. You guys notice this if you can predict but when you establish your
Okay, if you will stay then at your boards, and we're going to quickly just review what is up there. Okay? So we'll start with this group. If you just want to share nice and loud about demonstration project, you don't have to read all of that to us, just a couple highlights of pros and cons for demonstration. You're on.
So our group talk about demonstration, and we look at various examples. Like some of them was like probably collections of what do you mean collections of
But I didn't specify. So that's planned.
Sure, yes.
and then like having a particular topic, and then having students choose their method of demonstration, like public service announcements or skits or using a video or
Okay.
a comedy. And then some of the positives of this was that they can choose their own way of learning based on their skill level. They can have more student involvement and like kind of developing peer interaction with each other. And then it also can kind of facilitate diversity in classroom because they have different skills and different backgrounds.
Sure.
And then some of the negatives were that some students, so you can't assess everybody's skill level because it's just a lot of students, and how to make everybody participate in that activity requires a lot of coordination. So these were some of the things that we kind of came up with as a group.
Okay, good, good. Let's move to the second one. This is using bonus questions.
So I put bonus questions in the middle of the class because from previous experience, I was TAing in a large class with 150 students, and they are not at all attentive in the class sometimes. They do not show up in class. So this strategy really helps in bringing them to class and try to focus on the course material being taught because they know we'll have these bonus questions coming up in the middle of the lecture. So the pros and cons is some other people have put down the other groups that it's optional for students. Yes, if your grade is good, sometimes they do not want to take the bonus questions, and it's fearful for students. Some people are scared, oh, we won't be able to get to the questions. But yes, it is a good way to improve their attention level in class.
Good, and obviously there's more detail up there that you've already talked about, but that's a good overview.
Speak up in the back.
Nice and loud so the microphone. Good. So we're talking about final project, gives students an opportunity to work on their ideas and their concepts. They work together. At least one drawback is, and we've all witnessed this probably, when it's a group activity, not everybody is involved equally. Did I say that as nicely as I could? Yeah, we've already been there. Let's go to our fourth group. This is a seminar. Nice and loud so we can pick you up here.
All right, so our topic was having the students present a seminar, which could be either a short presentation on a topic, maybe up to a whole class, depending on the individual class. So some of the positives is it really helps enforce presentation and talking skills, and it's an easy way to kind of incorporate recent information, things that students might be interested in, and it's a little bit of a different structure kind of in the classroom. And some of the negative aspects are, bigger class, time aspect of it, making sure not everyone's presenting on the same topic, and certainly some students just aren't good at presenting. They have very fear of presenting, which is something they need to work through, but can definitely impact their grade.
Good. Very, very good. And that last point, it has always dumbfounded me, frankly, that students can come to a university like Florida or the other places I've been, and they have never made a presentation in front of a group. Really? And so they are very nervous about getting up in front and doing even their part of a seminar or doing their part of a final report presentation. It just amazes me that happens. So those are parts of the skills on the undergraduate curriculum that are there. We just need to teach them. So good point. Go ahead and return to your seats then so that we can see and hear better, and we'll wrap this part up here in just a couple minutes.
So Kirby, I asked them, they might give their observations of watching the process.
Okay.
I don't know if they don't want to say anything, they can if they want to, on the microphone.
For our colleagues who are not here in the microbiology building, any thoughts that you want to share or observations that you have in being bystanders, I guess, to carousel brainstorming this time?
To pick on Riza.
I think it could be much chaotic in the small classroom and with many students.
Could be chaotic, and in fact, Dr. Waisaki had written on that you're pretty quiet. And that's true. That's because you're postdocs, for heaven's sakes. By now, we're just a little bit more quiet, aren't we? A little more reserved, a little more professional, whatever term you want to use. For other sets of groups, it might be more chaotic. That's a good point. Yeah. Okay. Now, Dr. Turner had shared with you some pluses and minuses of active learning strategies. Carousel brainstorming is one of those. What are some pluses and minuses of using this active learning strategy, this active learning technique in a class? Very quickly, some pluses.
Logistics of listening.
Is a barrier, perhaps?
Yeah.
Yes, right. The size of the class, the logistics. We don't always have these kinds of walls. Most of the time I use flip charts. You can't get as much stuff on there. The size of the class, if we have 600, we probably are not going to put them in groups of 4 and have them wander around the room. We'll never see them again. Let's see. It's hard to follow the experiment. A general problem, maybe students then decide whether other students' contributions are actually correct. Makes sense. Excellent. And is it Urka? Good point, Urka. And what we typically would do then is spend more time in reviewing what is up here so that at the end of our discussion on demonstrations, you all have the, for lack of a better term, right answers. So we could talk about, is requiring more technical skills, is that really a plus or a minus for demonstrations? So we summarize all of those, and we're not just pooling ignorance and also sharing with each other things that are wrong. That's my role then as the teacher, to work through each of those 4 examples to bring closure to all 4 of those topics. And I'm going to circle back to that here in just a minute. Other pros or cons in using carousel brainstorming.
People can start talking about something else other than what you told them.
Loss of control. Yes, they're talking about the football game Saturday or whatever. And other very important topics as we are university people. Sure, we don't know that. We can walk around and make sure they're on target. Because I was watching you. I gave you such a little bit of time. You really didn't have time to get off task. But I was watching that you were still writing, engaging with one another. But that's work on my part. Good point. Others?
Some person coming in, they may have all the ideas, but there's a chance that
Yes, any time that we're in groups, there might be a dominant person, there might be a person who does know it all, or a person who thinks that he or she does know it all, and the others, I'm kind of this way actually, kind of stand back, but you just go, guy, it's whatever. As long as you're working, I don't have to. Yes, that's great. So we have to, that's always a problem with any group activity. Others? Let me share one that typically would come up. And that is the amount of time that this took. Yeah, anytime we get students engaged, it takes more time. But think of this. We did 4 topics in that amount of time. We did 4 topics, not 1 topic. We did 4. So in a way, it's somewhat efficient in getting you to be actively engaged, in getting you to get that content up there. But then, as I indicated, we have to come back and make sure that we summarize each of those 4 assessment strategies. So we taught 4 assessment strategies all at the same time. Well, it seems like it was taking a lot of time. We were actually doing 4 topics all at the same time instead of doing them sequentially. First, we would have a presentation. I would do a lecture on demonstrations, which must be an oxymoron there somewhere, and a lecture on using bonus questions, and a lecture on seminars, and a lecture on project work. So that's, sometimes we'll think, now, granted, it's not for big classes. Some of the other strategies that we've talked about, like a 1-minute paper, think, pair, share, I think you've used that before. I used that with a group of 600 once. Think, pair, share. It can work in large groups. Carousel brainstorming won't work with 600. This is almost the ideal size, maybe another 5, 6, 7, 8 students. So questions, follow-up thoughts that you have on carousel brainstorming before we move to our last influence that. Good interaction. Yes, ma'am.
I know for some, I went to different schools and they have lots of 1,000 students in the actual hall. And they use what we call the iClicker, so they'll have to do an assessment, they'll have a question on the PowerPoint, and they'll ask the question to all the students, and they'll have this device that they can actually select their response, and you can see the responses on the board, on the whiteboard, everybody a chance to participate.
Yes, absolutely. Have you talked about the individual response? Elements? Not really. You wrote it in iClicker. Yeah, I know, it's developed at the University of Illinois. That's where the I comes from. The physics people.
I thought it's still
Illinois.
now.
And I thought maybe you'd been at Illinois or something. The physics people of Illinois created the iClicker, which is the same McGraw-Hill. I mean, everybody has it.
Just adding to that, though, I think we're doing it too.
Right, we moved beyond that because now everybody can text. You can text this right now.
Yeah.
Do this to 3792 and you can vote.
You could do the same thing with Twitter.
Yeah, Twitter. Yeah, for those who, I have a Twitter account, but I don't Twitter. I don't even know how to get my Twitters.
You don't
My
tweet.
tweets.
I don't either, but I have an account. So, just a couple of last things. One about promoting active learning, and I think you all are buying in that these are good strategies, and this can be an effective way for students to learn. There are some things to think about, and one is the classroom environment. If you want to do things where people are being in groups, but the chairs are fixed or you can't move around, it does make it more difficult. So you have to adapt to what the environment you have. As Kirby said, in almost any setting, you can do things like minute papers and think pair shares and those sorts of things. The clickers, even if you're in a fixed location, there are ways that you can get students engaged in the process. The facilitator attitude is very important. You got to play to your strengths. You got to know what's in your comfort zone, what's a little outside your comfort zone, what's way outside. Okay, and think about how you, as the facilitator, you as the instructor, is best suited to engaging students and getting some active learning going on in the classroom. And then student attitude. Seth brought up that he had an experience where students felt like some of the activities he had planned were beneath them. I'll just put it that way. And so, again, students have to understand why we're doing what we're doing. Just like we need to understand the process, the students do too. And I just have kind of a summary slide. We know students are thinking these things. Who cares? Why do I need to know this? Will I ever use this stuff? What's going to be on the exam? How does this apply to my life? We know that they're asking those questions. So it's our responsibility as instructors to make sure we show so that they understand and they have a need to learn what we want them to learn. So make it connect, make it relevant, make it part of their life. Show how it connects to what's in the news or what's trending online or wherever it is. But that's really important anytime with any kind of teaching to make sure students understand why we're doing what we're doing. And then further, if we're doing something different in the classroom than they're used to, why we're doing that. My husband taught a class this summer in a flipped model, and I encouraged him from the beginning to talk about why are we doing it this way? What are the benefits? What should you gain from this experience? So that students understand that it's not just, well, they're just wanting me to just do all the work. Because sometimes students think if they have to watch the lectures at home and then they come to class and they're doing the homework, I'm doing all the work. What's the teacher doing, right? Well, isn't that the point? We want them to learn. And one of the comments earlier from our group outside of the classroom was that teaching each other is one of the best ways to learn, right? Being immersed in the material so that you can teach it. So one more thing I want you to write down, and I don't know if you have, some of you have paper that you can detach and submit. I would prefer a detach and submit if you could. have it attached and submit, you can email it to Grady. And we'll just take, because we don't have a whole lot of time, we'll just take a minute for you to respond to another active learning strategy, and I'll use the title. What is the muddiest point? What is still unclear to you about active? What is still unclear to you? What is the muddiest point? What is still unclear to you about active learning? Would just you can just leave that on the tables and we'll collect those, and then Kirby and I can look through and provide some responses for Brady and Natalie to post in Sakai or to bring back to you next week. My final summary, then I'm going to have Kirby come up and see if he has anything else to add. So let's there we go. So how do we get started? How do we incorporate strategies? AJ wrote, I think I as a teacher need to develop some excellent active learning teaching material. How do we do that? And one of the ways to start is to think about your teaching from the view of the learner. What is it like to be in my classroom? What would I like it to be like to be in my classroom? When I interview faculty candidates for positions here on campus, that's one of the questions I ask them is, what is it like to be a student in your classroom? And that tells me a lot about their teaching. Think about what it's like to be the learner. What would you like that experience to be? How would you accomplish it? The internet is a great resource. If you are very broad and just type in active learning into Google, oh my gosh. But if you type in some of these strategies and maybe your discipline, I bet you'll find lots of examples out there already, things that you can borrow, things that you can adapt from others. Creating student buy-in is key to the subject, to the activities, to the process, and the key to that again is that they understand why we're doing what we're doing. Why are we doing this? And then designing, this is the part that does take time, designing strategies that cause your learners to think, to write, to talk, to do, to be involved. Okay? And you'll see it. You'll see it in the group. You'll see it in their behavior. You'll see it in their performance. I think it will enhance their learning, make your teaching more fun, and the classroom a great place to be. So I hope that we have engaged you in an active way today. Seen a number of examples of active learning strategies. I think most of them have worked really well. Do you have anything to add?
I'd like to point out that the handout that is online, as I understand actually 16 different strategies on there. We've not done all 16. So make sure you take a look at that and just to amplify what Dr. Turner said. If you log in and try to find something on Think, Fair, Share that is there in your fields, I don't know all of your fields, but I do know that, for example, there is a Journal of Food Science Education, which is more of the teaching and learning part of food science as a part of the food chemistry, as opposed to the chemistry. There's a Journal of Agronomic Education, which the whole plant soil area. I don't know that because I reviewed with them. So those are other places to go and see what people in your discipline are doing, especially as
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for having us.
thanks, folks.
Let's thank our invited guests. So next week, Dean Balzer will be leading our session, right? And we're going to have a panel of folks in to share some things. And so it should be another good opportunity to hear from others. We've tried to invite lots of different kinds of people into Teachers College for you guys to get the perspective of lots of different people. Because some things that work for some of us don't work for others, and so hearing from lots of different people is a good thing. So a couple reminders, teaching philosophy statements. If you've got some of those from Natalie to review, please get those reviewed and back in a timely manner. If you've not submitted yours, ASAP, and we'll get that out for you folks too. All right, so thank you everyone, and have a good rest of your week.
Hey guys.
Especially when you can walk it tonight on it.
Especially see you next week.
Oh, yeah, this is better than little flip charts. Thank you, Dr.